All right. Welcome all to RJ Julia and Wesleyan RJ Julia Bookstore's virtual event. We have authors Emily Liebert and Kimberly Belle here tonight, and we are so excited for our discussion. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few quick Zoom housekeeping details for you. Please ask questions throughout the night using the chat box function of your Zoom screen. We're going to get to as many of your questions as we can later in the evening. Even though you'll remain muted throughout the duration of the event, we do have an RJ Julia staff member who is monitoring the chat box. So send your questions on over. We will get to them later in the evening. For optimal viewing, you can use Zoom view functions in the top right corner of the screen. Select speaker view so that the speaking author will remain highlighted throughout the duration of the event for you. And of course, don't forget to purchase copies of Perfectly Famous and Stranger in the Lake. Links for book purchases will be sent to you in that Zoom chat box. We do have signed book plates from Emily Liebert, which are currently available while supplies last when you purchase a copy of Perfectly Famous. So let's get this event started, shall we? We are thrilled to be hosting authors Emily Liebert and Kimberly Belle this evening. Emily is a USA Today best-selling author of 6 books and has been featured on the Today Show and in publications such as the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Ladies' Home Journal, People, the Washington Post, and many more. In addition to writing novels, Emily pens a travel and books column in each issue of Westport magazine, for which she's the book's correspondent. She lives with her husband and 2 sons in Connecticut. Kimberly is the USA Today and internationally best-selling author of 5 novels of suspense. Her 3rd novel, The Marriage Lie, was a semifinalist for the 2017 Goodreads Choice Awards for Best Mystery and Thriller and has been translated into a dozen languages. Before turning to fiction, Kimberly worked in marketing and nonprofit fundraising. She divides her time between Atlanta and Amsterdam. So without further ado, please help me in welcoming Emily and Kimberly.
Hi, guys.
Hey, hi. So glad to be here. So Emily and I have a really funny story about how we met. And excuses if you've heard this one before, because every time we talk about it.
We have to tell the story.
So why don't you tell us about it? Me too. So why don't you tell it?
Okay, fine. I'll tell it this time. So my kids were at sleepaway camp last summer, and my husband and I decided to take a trip while they were there, and we decided to go to Amsterdam and Lake Como, and our first stop was Amsterdam. So we took an overnight flight to Amsterdam. We landed at the airport, and as soon as we got off the plane, everyone was going to the bathroom. All the women were going to the bathroom. And my husband kept saying, don't go in this bathroom. There'll be another one soon. And we passed like 3 or 4 bathrooms and I really had to go. So finally I was like, I gotta go to this bathroom. And I walk into this bathroom and this woman is there. And I'm looking at her and I'm thinking, I know this woman, but like, I can't place how I know her, because why would I know any woman in a bathroom in the airport in Amsterdam? And we kind of did like a double take of each other, both sort of recognized each other. And then I think one of us was like, was it you or me? We were like, wait, or was it sort of at the same moment? It was you. Okay, it's Kimberly. She's taking the credit now. It's totally fine. She realized that I was me, and then I realized that she was her. And it was just so awesome because we had never met in person before. We had only communicated via social media. And how random is it? I thought it was random. I didn't know she lived partly in Amsterdam. And I thought it was completely random because I had never been to Amsterdam before. And there you go. That's how we ended up meeting in the bathroom in the Amsterdam airport. Did I miss anything?
I love it. I love it. It was so funny because we both did like the turnaround at the exact same time. And I was like, I know you.
Yep.
So All
That's
right.
right.
It was fun. It's a good story. So let's talk about other stories now. Tell us about your book, Perfectly
Okay.
Famous, and
So-
kind of what sparked the idea in your head.
Sure. So here's the book, Perfectly Famous. I don't know if you guys see that backwards in the way I do, but I do.
No.
Oh, you guys see it the right way. Okay. So Perfectly Famous is about two strong women. I love writing about strong women who have some kind of obstacle to overcome in their lives throughout the story. So that was part of the inspiration for it. One of the main characters is Ward DeFleur, and she is a very famous crime novelist. And at the beginning of the book, we find out that her teenage daughter, Stevie, has been abducted and killed. And she flees. Ward, when she finds this out, she goes into a state of depression. She reneges on all her future book deals, and no one can find her. No one knows where she is. Enter a second woman named Brie Bennett, who is a former journalist come housewife. And she has just been divorced. Her own teenage daughter doesn't really need her anymore, and she's feeling a big void in her life, and she decides to go back to work writing for a local newspaper. And in doing that, she decides that she's going to find her favorite author, Ward DeFleur, tell her story, and she ends up getting entangled with Ward's daughter Stevie's killer in the process. So, dun, dun, dun.
I love it. It was so good. It was amazing.
Thank you.
And I love how, a novelist is writing about another novelist. Did you use any of your own experiences writing about Ward, or was that how did you use your own stuff in the book?
So it's interesting because before I was an author, I was actually more of a journalist. I worked for ABC News. I did a lot of freelance writing for magazines and newspapers. I was a magazine editor-in-chief. And so some of my experiences went into Brie, and then some of my experience as an author went into Ward. So a little bit of me was in both characters, even though, as I always say, Ward, even though she's this hugely famous author, she really likes to communicate with her readers from the safeness of behind her computer screen. She has anxiety about big events and going out in public, and I am quite the opposite of that. I don't have any awkwardness or nervousness about being around a lot of people. So that was interesting for me to write. But in some ways, I think even though Ward's an author and I am now, I think there was more of me in Brie.
Interesting. And you were talking about how you enjoy going out and, getting to meet your readers and interact with your readers. And that's kind of how your story begins, right? Because Ward is at this book signing when she gets the news that her daughter is missing, maybe killed at that point, right? And so it's kind of interesting / tragic that when this book came out, you weren't able to go out and do any of these signings. How has that been, releasing into a pandemic and having all your events only online?
Well, your book came out the week after mine did, I think, 1 or 2 weeks after mine did. So I think it's really hard. I think the biggest reward after writing these books and working so hard on them is getting to interact with your readers and talk about the books and meet people in person. And I like that face-to-face contact. That's a big part of, I think, our job. But in the best way possible. It's the really fun part of our job. The bummer part is when we actually have to write the book. The fun part is getting to go out and talk about it. So that's been really hard. I think the one silver lining, as you and I have also discussed, is that these virtual events allow a much wider group of people to join. So if we're in, you know, Boston, Massachusetts, only people in Boston can come. If we're in San Francisco, only people in San Francisco come. But yet when you do the virtual event, anyone can sign in from anywhere. So that is a silver lining I'm trying to look at, but it's definitely tough. And I definitely want to, you know, get out and do in-person events as soon as possible, as I'm going to throw that question back to you.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of echo everything you just said. I really miss getting out and talking to people face to face and actually talking about books. I mean, I love the virtual events, and I hope that they continue in some format, even once, you know, we're able to get back out. And yeah, but I do miss it. And I don't think every author is like us, because I think that there are a lot of ward de fleurs who kind of are a little,
Yes.
you know, introverted. But I really enjoy getting out on the road and going to see people. It's exhausting. And by the end, I'm so ready to go home, but I do miss it. I miss it. So, can we talk a little bit about your process for writing? Because like you put this, it's basically two different kind of stories that intertwine, right? Two women characters. And do you know going in, do you have a plot already in your head or on paper? Do you know how their stories are gonna intertwine, or is that you figure it out as you're writing it?
With this book, I definitely had a very thorough outline. It was over 30 pages, and I plotted everything out. I knew all the twists and turns, and I thought that I knew how the book was going to end. And I think, as I've told you this, but I'll tell everyone else, I pulled what I call a Kimberly Belle. And I decided, well, I don't know if she changes her endings at the last minute like I do, but I changed my ending, and it ended up being sort of a shocker, oh my God ending in like the last line or two, which Kimberly has done before to me, just saying. And so everything was plotted out except the ending, which I changed as I was writing it. And it has been a polarizing ending. It's been very interesting to see what people have said. Some people are loving it. Some people are feeling like they were left and, oh my God, what's going to happen next? And is there going to be a sequel? So we shall see. Maybe there will be. But not next. It's not my
next. That's good too. Like a sequel. Yeah. A sequel is always fun. And I kind of like those kinds of endings where there's still more story there, and it's kind of up to the reader to decide which direction that story is going to go.
I like that as well.
I like it. But I've never done that, changed an ending, because I write from an outline too, and changing the ending, I mean, it comes out a little different sometimes than is in my outline, but I've never changed like the bad guy or no.
Or like as you were writing it.
Right.
She knew the good ending ahead of time. I had to figure it out as I went.
Yeah, exactly. So I read a Guardian article, it was probably about a month or so ago, about how authors hear their characters talking in their head, like literally hear them, their voices, their tone, their, you know, way of speaking. And are you one of those authors, or are we all crazy?
No, I definitely hear my characters fully. I know how everyone sounds. I know what they would say. I know what they would do. I think that's why it's hard sometimes to write an outline without changing it as you go. I mean, I have eliminated characters as I've gone. I've added new characters who make sense. I always try to have that skeletal outline for sure. With this book, it was more defined and I didn't really change that much. But in the past, I have written outlines and then changed a good amount of it as I've gone along, because I start hearing those characters and how they would say something and what they would say. And that may not have been how I envisioned it from the start. And you are too, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I have that too. I write from an outline, but my outlines are really plot focused. So once you get in and you start, getting to know your characters, sometimes they turn out to be different than you thought they were going to be going in. And so you do have to change that. And I have added characters, maybe taken one or two side characters out. But really my big plot points have never changed.
Same.
Which is weird. But you've also written a book where you didn't have a plot, have it plotted out in advance. Which way do you prefer writing?
Well, this book right here, Pretty Revenge, which came before Perfectly Famous, I did not have any outline for. And that did not work out well for me. By the way, I'm eating Cheez-Its for those of you who wonder what's going on here. It's happening. It's my dinner. I had a bowl of ice cream before this. But anyway, I digress.
I'm washing them down.
With Pretty Revenge, I wrote no outline. And it didn't work out well for me. What ended up happening was that I wrote the book, and there was a much heavy editoring process on the back end than I anticipated. So I wrote a whole book and then sort of overhauled it like 2 or 3 times. And typically when I write a book, I deliver a pretty clean first manuscript. It definitely goes through an editing process, but it was nothing like for Pretty Revenge. So I think that's why I went in the opposite direction for Perfectly Famous and wrote such a long, thorough outline, which I'd always written outlines, but they had never been quite that specifically mapped out as Perfectly Famous was. So yeah, it was, I need an outline. I need some kind of outline, whether relatively skeletal or specific. And I'm already working on my next book, and there are some question marks in the outline, but it's a pretty thorough, it's like a 30-page outline, and I've already got about 4 chapters, so.
Yeah, I'm the same. I really like writing from an outline. I think it's because there are so many moving pieces in the kind of stories that we write, and like, how do you keep all that straight? I just don't know. I know lots of authors who do it that way, though, who write, just sit down and tell themselves a story, and they must be the Rain Man or something, because I couldn't keep it all straight.
How authors put 10,000 words down in a day and then cut it back 5,000 the next day. I write like the amount of words that's my goal per day.
Yeah.
I'm not just like a
me too
fill it onto the page kind of person and then pull it all back. I write in a very edited kind of way. Sometimes I wish I had more words, honestly. So wait, I want to ask, can I turn the tables now? Can I ask you some questions?
Yeah.
So,
of course.
Stranger in the Lake. Give us the synopsis. Can you give us a quick synopsis? Yes.
I happen to have it right here.
Love it. So, just so happen to have it.
So Stranger in the Lake is right, just right here. Stranger in the Lake is a story about a woman named Charlotte who she's grown up really rough, and her mother is an addict, her father is in prison, and she lives in a very small mountain town in North Carolina on a lake, and meets this man. He's much older, he's much wealthier, and they, despite all their differences, they fall in love and get married, and they're very happy together until one morning she discovers a body floating under the dock behind their home in the exact same spot where her husband's first wife drowned. And the story just really unravels from there. She has to decide, does she really know this guy that she married? Is he telling the truth? you know, what secrets might he be hiding from her? So.
And what inspired this story?
Well, so I was about to say too.
Buried body there.
Yeah. So I am at a lake house. This is what we're calling our Coronication. We've rented a home at a lake house, Lake Glenville in North Carolina, which is kind of the inspiration for this story. We have friends who live on this lake, and we come up to visit them a lot, and it's a gorgeous, beautiful area. But it's near Highlands and Cashers, North Carolina. If you guys know any of that, it's an area that is, you know, in the foothills of the Appalachians. It's you have a very stark difference between the very wealthy people who've come in and transformed the area, built all these country clubs and these beautiful $1 million homes on the lake. And then you have the people like Charlotte who've lived here for generations, who are maybe not as well educated, who've, you know, really, they're the ones who are basically scrubbing the toilets and flipping the burgers for the wealthier people in town. So I've been up here enough that I saw that dynamic and the way it plays out, you know, even though people like Paul, Charlotte's husband, have lived here maybe for a couple of generations, they're still kind of the outsiders because they're the ones with the money. So there's a real us versus them dynamic that just fascinated me. And so I've wanted to set a story on a lake for a really long time, because I think a lake for people like Emily and me, when we are, you know, writing a story about something scary, some sort of thriller thing, all you have to do is say there's a lake, and readers pretty much know that something bad's going to happen there. So when I came up with the idea for this story, I thought, oh, I know exactly where to set it, and exactly who Charlotte and Paul are going to be. So, yeah.
There we go. Okay.
Emily, you're muted. Okay, you're unmuted.
I thought I muted myself somehow, and then I got unmuted. So
I want to talk about titles.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I wanted to talk about titles because we've talked about this before. My titles I've never come up with one of my titles. Never. Like none of them have
so amazing.
It's always been my editor who, thank goodness, she's genius. My editor is genius at titles and the tagline. She's come up with them all. And I turn in a book is like, I'm writing currently book number 7. So that's when I turn it in. It's called book number 7. But no, I've tried and they've never stuck. So I just gave up. Yeah.
So
but you came up with all your titles.
I have named all but one of my 7 books. The book that I did not name was When We Fall, and that I had named The Love That Got Away. And they thought that was too many words, too much of a title. And they suggested a bunch, and we ended up with When We Fall, which was a really generic title in retrospect and didn't have a ton to actually do directly with what the book was about. But yeah, no, I've done all of my other titles.
So Perfectly Famous, like, when you started writing the book, was it already in your head that was the title, or did it come later? Like, where did that?
Later, this one. So with Perfectly Famous, I had done Pretty Revenge prior and discussed with the editor and publisher that we wanted another 2-word title where the 2 words actually sort of belied each other. So usually revenge isn't pretty, and it's hard to be famous and perfect, you know, especially in the spotlight these days. So with that one, there was sort of a specific directive with it. And so, no, that didn't come immediately. I'm sure I had like a bunch of other ideas before we settled on that title. But most of the other books, I knew what I wanted them to be called. And fortunately, my publisher agreed. But
That's amazing to me because
you have a good editor.
Well, thank you. But I haven't come up with any of them. I've come up with none of them.
So you don't even like throw ideas into the ring?
I mean, we do. We usually have, you know, one of those like meetings / a conference calls or an email string that goes back and forth between me, my editor, and my agent.
Mm-hmm.
And where we throw it around. But, you know, they have a whole department that thinks of nothing but, you know, titles, how to position the book, covers, you know, they are really the experts. So when they tell me that they don't like that title, I don't even question it. I'm like, okay, well, you guys know what you're doing. So I kind of
I agree. I wouldn't fight for it either. But what about your covers? Did they always get them right the first time?
Except with 3 Days Missing, and I don't have that one here, but it's that one went through a title change and a cover change kind of at the last minute. Our ARCs were already printed, our advanced reader copies, reviewer copies. They were already out and printed. It was called Little Boy Lost. And then they changed it probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 months before publication to 3 Days Missing and completely revamped the cover, everything. But here's, you know, I mean, there are a couple of really important, book buyers who, if they don't like the cover, it is back to the drawing board.
Yep.
So
100%. Yeah. So with this, did you know the ending? For this one, did you know the ending?
I knew the ending, but this is one of those books that went through a total overhaul. Even though I was working from an outline, when I turned it in, actually when I was writing it even, I kept getting like hung up on the story that this story was based on. And I can't really talk too much about it without giving a big part of the plot away. Right. And so I went back and I wove in some past chapters from Jack's, one of the character viewpoints that happened like back in the 90s. So, but yeah, even when you have an outline, you can still get into trouble when you're writing because the way you think the story is going to be told, and every story is different, right? So what works for one story doesn't necessarily work for the next.
Completely.
So I don't know. Every time I think I've got the hang of this writing thing, something else happens in my story, and I'm like, oh no, I got to figure it all out all over again. Exactly. So I once got asked this question, and now I ask it of everybody I interview. When you decided to, well, you wrote books that maybe weren't super in the suspense thriller category before these, right? But when you decided to make that switch to the thriller suspense genre, did you have to have like a coming out moment to your friends and family and be like, I'm going to murder some people on paper, and don't be afraid of me? And does your husband sleep with one eye open?
That's hysterical. So no, I think even though these two books, Pretty Revenge and Perfectly Famous, are my only two sort of like thriller-esque books, I think they really straddle the line between women's fiction, which is what I was writing before this, and suspense. So even though there is an abduction and, you know, possible murder in this book, I don't feel like it's like such like a crazy, oh my God, like, wow, what's going on in her mind kind of situation. And the other book, it's almost more edgier women's fiction. It was about revenge. No one died, you know. And I'm actually, with my next book, the next book I would say is definitely edgy, like sort of a little bit edgier women's fiction. It is not a thriller. So, no, but I definitely wonder what's going on in your mind.
I get asked that a lot.
If I was sleeping with you, I'd sleep with one eye open.
Yeah, and everybody, you know, like when I came out with the marriage lie, everybody, that was their first question, is like, "What's your marriage lie?"
Yeah. Well, everyone always thinks that
I've been married for
our books are about us and that we're the main character. My mother and mother-in-law think they are the mother and mother-in-law in every book that I write. My mom's like, I didn't do that. I'm like, she's not you. She's like, whatever. You know.
It's true. But, you know, I mean, I think that's why women suspense authors are doing so well and writing such great books, is because they come from that, I don't want to say women's fiction, but maybe a little from the women's fiction, or at least the women's mindset, you know, where the characters really grow and develop. It's not just plot and crazy things happening and stabbings and shootings and whatever, but it's really about a journey of, you know, one or more main characters, often women, who, you know, start the story one way, they learn and grow, and they end another way. I mean, I think that women are really doing great in this, don't you? I mean, we're kind of killing it.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. And I thought that Charlotte/Charlie was a great character. I thought she really was three-dimensional. I felt like I knew who she was before she was with Paul, who she was while she was with Paul. I thought she was a good, strong, but authentic character.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. And I say the same about your characters. And I think, you know, they're also, maybe that's one of the things that the women writers do well too, is we're positioning women who, you know, they may have some issues and some things to work through, but really, like my characters, your characters, both, they're kind of their own heroines, right? They save themselves.
Yeah.
They figure their stuff out.
Characters' names.
So for me, naming the names is really like this magical gut like thing. It has to fit. And if it doesn't fit, I'll usually, that's one thing I do change in almost every book I've ever written, is the name of the main character. Because I'll start with one name and it won't feel authentic. It won't feel like it's the right person. It just won't fit. And so I change it, and then all of a sudden the character falls into place in my head.
That's so interesting. I will change like peripheral characters, but I rarely change the main characters. But that's interesting. Yeah. I like that.
Yeah, I was actually doing an edit, just another read through of the book that I'm writing now, book number 7. And I was like reading through, and I was like, who's James? James, there's no James in here, but that was my main male character's name back when I started writing.
Oh, funny.
It's funny. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about what's next for you? You said it's not thriller, it's more edgy women's fiction, but can you tell us a little bit more?
Absolutely. The next book is about 3 major social media influencers, one in the parenting space, one in the fashion space, and one in the health and wellness space. And they're all competing for the Forbes magazine Influencer of the Year award. And let's just say they will do anything it takes to win.
I love it. Sounds awesome. Do you have a title?
Right now, the working title is Clout, but we shall see.
I love it.
What are you
So when you were writing it, did you did you have any sort of COVID, like pandemic, anything? Did that make its way into your story in any way?
So, I've talked about this with a bunch of authors. No, I started writing it before the pandemic, and I took a little break during the pandemic because I was homeschooling my kids and I was launching this book, and I had, a far enough deadline that I could take a little time. And I thought about briefly whether or not to include it or not. And I had sort of already outlined the whole story. And also, the book isn't going to come out probably for another year or maybe a little less. But, from the time you write it and the time it comes out, it's so long that who knows where we'll be at that point. And I wasn't sure that people in fiction would want to continue to read about the pandemic after it's sort of in the past. And so I just thought, this is fiction. This is a different world. And this is something I started before the pandemic. So no, it is not playing a role in the book at all. What about you? What are you working on? And is it playing a role in your book?
Yeah, so I had started writing mine like back in February, March, when, we kind of knew it was coming, but we didn't have any idea what was in store for us. And it's something that I thought long and hard about, but I had originally set the story in the spring of 2020, like, April-ish. And then I realized that the pandemic was going to screw that whole thing up. So I moved it to the fall of 2020, which, I don't know. We still don't know what's going to happen by then, but I think I have enough of a grip on it. And my story is absolutely not about the pandemic. It's about a home invasion. So I used the pandemic and COVID as kind of a plot device because my main character's husband has some money problem. And he owns a group of restaurants. So the pandemic has contributed to the money problem. So, they're stuck in a house with like someone who's invaded their home. So they're not really worried about the 6 foot, social distancing aspect of it. But it definitely does play a role in the plot for sure.
Interesting.
So I have some questions here that are coming in from our audience. If you guys want to start to take some of those.
Sure.
All right, fantastic.
Sure.
I have a question here from Sherry. Sherry asks, with the types of stories you both write, how hard is it to let go and not have the stories in your head all of the time so you can sleep at night? There were parts of Stranger in the Lake that had my heart palpitating.
I'll let you take that first, Kim.
So super hard because when I write a story, I'm kind of total immersion, and I like to just go at the story kind of obsessively until it's at least that first draft is out. So it's really hard for me to put it down at night, and that's something that I struggle with and work on constantly because I also have a family who, kind of like me to participate at dinner times and, be there for them. And I have other things to do. So it is hard for me to put it down. And it's something that I constantly have to work at to do. And I don't know about you, Emily, but for me, the best ideas and like the things that I'm trying to work out in my head will come to me after I've close my computer, right? So you're in the shower or you're out for a run or you're watching a movie at night with your husband, and then all of a sudden, boom, it comes in your head.
Definitely. So it's not hard for me to put it down. I can write the 4 hours that I usually write and then not go back and write, but it is not easy for me to stop thinking about it. And like Kimberly, it comes to me when I'm in the shower, in the middle of the night, when I'm driving, all of the times when you actually can't be writing it. So I have a notes document on my computer and I email myself. I used to write it on like actual Post-it notes, but now I email myself anytime I have an idea. And sometimes I'll have an idea and I'll start writing a whole scene in an email to myself because I'm hearing the dialogue and I'm hearing what's going to happen. And I'll just write it all out and then I'll cut and paste it and put it in that notes document for tomorrow. So I can compartmentalize in the actual, like, not feeling like I need to run back to the document and write it, but I do have to write out those notes and at least like email them to myself.
Yeah. And that goes back to like the characters talking to you, right? That you hear them in your head. And that's, for me too, one thing that comes super, kind of one of the first things is the dialogue, right? And so you can go back and thread and make everything pretty later, but the dialogue, you got to get that down as soon as they start talking.
Totally. And sometimes I find myself sort of trying to like push it down. Like, you'll think of this later. This will all come to you later. Just like, I try not to let it, because once I know that it starts rolling, it could really roll, but it's hard to do that. And sometimes you don't want to, because you just want that good stuff to come out.
Right.
You know, you'll use it later.
When you have those moments, does it mess up your planned process at all? Like, I know you said that you mostly try to outline ahead of time, but when you have those creative inspiration moments, does it take you down another path, or?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes, and I think that's when stuff gets changed.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
We have another question here. How does it impact you or make you feel when there are rewrites and revamps to your original story?
Really?
Yeah, I'm like you, Emily. I tend to turn in a really pretty polished first manuscript. So when I have to revamp and rehaul that, it's really painful. Because, like I said, you know, I write from this outline. I think I know what my story is that I'm trying to tell. And then when I hear that it's not working the way that I wanted it to work, it's kind of like a knife in my heart. And I go back and, you know, I have to redo it. But yeah, it's no fun. I actually really like the stories that come out easily and all in one piece. And then, you know, it's fine tuning that happens with every story, but I'm not a big fan of the rehaul editing process. How about you?
Neither am I. I am not a big fan of overhauling anything. With the exception of Pretty Revenge, with all of my books, I've usually had a pretty tight editing process. It's been sort of one edit of a few larger ideas of things to just go back and look at. And then it's more of not a line edit yet, but like a smaller little sections or paragraphs in a scene. And then it's like words or lines. And with Perfectly Famous, since the outline was so tight, it went really quickly. 90% of the time, I err on the side of my editor is an editor for a reason. She knows what she's doing. She's giving me good advice. 10% of the time, I say, no, that's the way it's going to be. That's what she would have said. I know what she would have said, and I want to keep it.
Yeah, same. And, you know, I try to look at it as a group effort. You know, I know that we are the ones who actually write the story and come up with the story, but my editor and my agent is also a first reader for me. And, you know, we're all working together to make the strongest possible story we can make. So.
Yep.
Well, and that goes along with another question that just came in. How long does it take you to write a novel?
So Pretty Revenge took me over a year. That is the only book that ever took me that long, and that was because of all the overhauls. The others, a first manuscript in 5 months, And then, I mean, the whole thing with all the editing rounds, I don't know, 8 or 9 months probably, but I can get a first manuscript out in 5 months.
That's good. I'm usually more like 6 to 8 months for first manuscript, but book number 7, because it was pandemic and I go nowhere, I see no one, I wrote it in like 4 months. So,
That's
but that's
awesome.
the fastest I've ever written one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Does that include the creation of the outline, or is the outline separate from that?
No, that does not include the creation of the outline for me.
Okay.
Creating the outline is the hardest part. In many ways, I think creating the outline is harder than writing the book.
I agree with that. It's my least favorite part of the process.
Same.
This is an interesting one. If you could spend the day with one of your characters, who would it be and why?
I'm really giving that to you.
I think if I could spend the day with one of my characters, it would probably be Iris from The Marriage Lie, just because I really dug her. I thought she was cool and fun, and I wanted to grab her by the shoulders and shake her sometimes, but I really liked her a lot. She was witty. She was sincere. I choose her.
And she was kick-ass in the end. Spoiling anything, just saying. If I have to, I would say either Georgina from The Secrets We Keep, because she was a party girl and she was fun and she just like living life to the fullest. And then I would say Luella from You Knew Me When, my first novel, who was based on my maternal grandmother, and I would spend a day with her any day. So,
awesome. Yeah, I love that.
What are some favorite books, either past or currently reading, that you both recommend?
I came prepared for this. I just want to say I never come prepared. And I knew Kimberly was going to be prepared.
You start.
I came prepared. Okay, so here's what I'm looking forward to. I'm looking forward to Don't Look for Me by Wendy Walker.
Yes.
That is coming
That's on my list too.
In September. So really looking forward to that. Came out today, Musical Chairs by Amy Popel. This is an awesome, awesome book. She is an awesome person and writer, so I highly recommend this. And then I am looking forward to reading Cleo McDougall Regrets Nothing by Alison Wynne Scott. So, and then
I am currently reading that one.
What's that? You're reading
I said I'm currently reading that one, Allison's book, yeah.
Oh, nice. And then, of course, I always recommend Summer Sisters by Judy Blume. That's my go-to first love of my life book. So there you have it. It's an oldie but a goodie. And Stranger in the Lake, obviously.
Of course.
Which was an amazing book and also another surprising ending.
Thank you. Thank you. So I agree with all those books. The only one I would add is He Started It, Samantha Downing. It just came out today, and it's fabulous.
Nice.
Awesome. That's it for the questions portion of the evening. We did have a comment that came in that said how much they love the virtual events and that it allows them to have access to many more events than they would during a normal year. So that's great.
That's
I'm really
cool.
happy to hear that.
Love it.
That's all that we have for this evening. We're so thrilled that you both were able to join us tonight and talk about your new books. We're so excited for their release and so excited that they're ready to be shared with the world. Thought I had another question that came through, but okay. So just a big thank you, Emily, Kimberly, for being with us tonight, for sharing with us, and thank you to our wonderful guests for joining in, tuning in on the fun. Perfectly Famous by Emily Liebert and Stranger in the Lake by Kimberly Belle are available at both rjjulia.com and wesleyanrjjulia.com, or by visiting us in store or calling the store, whatever your comfortability level is during this crazy time in the world. Join us again next time. Happy reading all, and have a fantastic night.